Hello, MSc 504 students again. This is the second in the series of videos on how to do a pro forma valuation. I noticed, and as I've said in the email I sent you, I noticed that in the first video, sometimes the sound did not come out too well. There's not much I can do about that right now because my laptop, which is supposedly advanced and I paid a lot of money for it, does not allow for an external microphone. So I'm going to try to sit, I'm going to move up a little bit and try to sit as close to the mic as possible. And I've turned the audio up as much as possible. I'm not exactly sure how this will come out, but I think if I go slowly enough, in about 20 minutes, I can get this video done and the sound should be okay. Anyway, so let's start. Let's start where we left off last time. And based on what you did last time, what we did last time, you should already have a basic valuation constructed. This is what we did in the previous video. You'll notice that we had a two-stage valuation. The super growth period, which grew at 7%, had a cost of capital of 4%, and a constant growth period with a very low 1% cost of growth rate and a cost of capital of 3%. Now, these numbers may seem unrealistic, but that's we're just playing for now, let's say. Okay, now, free cash flows, you remember, totaled to 2,594. That would be 2,594,000,000. And then the super growth period had a total value of 14 billion. The terminal value period had a value of 151 billion. And then finally, the total value of the firm was 165 billion. And we got a value per share of $176.25, which is actually much higher than it's trading for now. But consider the fact that the stock market, every stock is probably tanked. I'm sure there's one or two that haven't. Maybe I don't want to say, but there's probably a couple that haven't. Anyway, so let's go ahead and start our pro forma valuation. Now, this video, I'm just going to do the beginning of a pro forma valuation, and you'll notice that the name of the video is Setup. And what I'm doing here is I'm going to set up the worksheet that you will use to construct the entire pro forma valuation. But if you do this right, the construction of the financial statements is fairly straightforward in the steps coming after that. Okay, so if you get the setup right, like in all things in life, if you do the setup right, then the rest is a little bit easier. Okay, so let's get started here. Okay, so as of last time, you had a sheet that was called Basic Valuation, is the sheet. Okay, and this basic valuation, we're actually going to use this whole format at the bottom of the final pro forma valuation that we do. So it wasn't just a review or lost time. We're actually going to use this format itself in the sheet that we're going to make. That's still 2 or 3 videos down the road. Okay, let's start by going over to Consolidated Balance Sheet Parenthetical and just inserting a sheet here. We'll insert a worksheet here. Okay, right-click on it, insert the worksheet, click on the worksheet, and you'll see sheet 1. Let's change the name of this sheet. We're inserting a sheet, and we're going to call it Pro Forma Valuation. Pro Forma, who cares? Pro Forma Valuation. Okay, so this is going to be the sheet where we complete our entire valuation of applied materials here using pro forma financial statements. Now the statements, because we're using videos, I'm going to construct a pro forma valuation, but I'm going to exclude a statement of cash flows, which you actually could include. So it's going to be a little shorter than the one that I usually do in class, but it's still the same concepts, and there really is very little difference. Okay, so once again, let's assume, the assumption in this model, just like in the other one, is that we're going to use a 2-stage model, okay, and we're going to have a model which Well, right here, we're going to have a super growth stage. Keep in mind that what we're doing is we're repeating what we did with the short form valuation, with the basic valuation here. We're repeating the same thing using a two-stage model, but it just has more detail in it. Okay, and we're going to use impute the same items to be assumed. One is we're going to for each of the two stages, we're going to have super growth stage, which is 5 years, like the basic valuation, and so we're going to use the same growth rate. So we're going to sort of assume a growth rate, and we're also going to assume a cost of capital. Okay, and then we're going to have, just like we did in the basic valuation, we're going to have a constant growth period. And in the constant growth period, we're also going to make assumptions about the growth rate and the cost of capital. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and bold this. Just for making it simple, for both the growth rate and the cost of capital, I'm going to use the same numbers that I used for the basic, when I did the basic valuation in the first video. I'm going to use the same growth rate and cost of capital for both stages. And I'm not going to link them. I'm not going to link them, even though I'm very picky about linking everything. In this case, I'm not going to link them. Okay, so in the basic valuation that you already did in the first video, we had a growth rate of 7% and a cost of capital of 4% for the super growth period. So I'm going to go ahead and use both those numbers in this number here. So we're going to use 7% growth rate in the super growth period and a 4% cost of capital in the for the super growth period. Now, just going back to recall, in the basic valuation, we used a constant growth rate of 1% for the terminal period, constant growth period. We used a growth rate of 1% and a cost of capital of 3%. So I'm just going to go ahead and do the same thing. We'll use a 1% growth rate and a 3% cost of capital. Of course, these models you build a model and then you change it as you go along. That's what the analysts do. So, we're just sort of starting to use these numbers as placeholders, as general placeholders. Okay, so now what we need to do is we're going to build a pro forma valuation. Now, you may have already taken some courses in which you build pro forma financial statements. I'm not sure that we offer any. But when you build pro forma financial statements, what you're doing is you're projecting out what you think your income statement, your balance sheet, and your statement of cash flows will look like in future years. And then what we're going to do is just discount the cash flows based on those financial statements. It's kind of like the basic valuation, but with a lot more detail. Okay, so let's first of all, I'm just going to pro forma, meaning project out, two of the financial statements and base my valuation on that. The first one is going to be the income statement. And I'll bold that out. And you might want to insert an extra row here just to give you space here. That's up to you. And then we'll do the balance sheet underneath. Okay, now my pro forma income statement is going to be the base year is going to be 2019, which is the year that this 10K is for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use the 2019 income statement and this 10K. Remember, we're looking at a 10K here in Excel form. I'm going to use that income statement as my base year and then project out for 5 years. Okay, so in this sheet here, we have the pro forma valuation. Now, the income statement will be about 4 or 5 worksheets to the left. So let's go to the left and see what we got here. There's your consolidated statement of operations. That's your income statement. Okay, so let's look at what we got here. What we're going to do is, first of all, note the date. The base date that we're going to use for our pro forma statements is October 27th, 2019. And you don't really have to link this, but I do like to copy this over so that we know what base date we're working with. Okay, so I'm going to take that, and this is from the income statement, on the actual income statement on the 10K. Go to my pro forma valuation, and I'm going to go ahead and write that in right here. I'm going to write that in right here. I'm just going to go ahead and copy that right here. So my base year is October, my base date is October 27th, 2019. Now, we're going to be a little bit off because we're in February now, so we're 4 or 5 months after that date, but we'll just leave it at that. And okay, so we're going to use that as our base date. And then, so basically 2019 is our base year. Okay, and so what I'm going to do is go ahead and add years. Obviously, you could drag and drop, whatever it's called, but I'm going to go ahead and write these out. We're going to go out 5 years. And so these 5 years are going to represent the 5-year super growth period. Okay, so starting in 2019, 1 year out is 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, and we'll be ending in 2024. Okay, so we'll do that, and we might as well make this a little bit more formal. So we'll bold these, and that looks pretty good right there. Okay, and now what I'm going to do, and I want you to be careful with this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the income statement on the in the 10K, and all I'm going to do is copy. I'm going to copy the all the titles in the income statement, including going all the way down through diluted earnings per share, and I'm going to copy the numbers for the income statement too. Okay, so I'm going to go over here, and you don't have to link this. This is, you don't have to link this. This is just a cut and paste, copy and paste type thing. So in order to make sure it all aligns right, what I'm going to do is start with net sales. And I'm just going to go ahead and go over to the 14 billion in net sales they had. So I'm just going to copy the first 2 columns of the income statement, going all the way down to earnings per share, even going to diluted earnings per share, the whole thing, all the titles and all the numbers to the right for the year ended 2019. I'm just going to go ahead and copy those over to my pro forma worksheet. So we're going to do this. Here's my pro forma valuation. I'm just going to go ahead and copy those numbers over. Okay, so that's going to be my base year right there. Okay, now the following step is one that I could have talked about a few minutes ago. It's very important, incredibly important, but I'm going to talk about it now. And here's what I'm going to do is we have numbers. We have numbers here, monetary numbers, dollars, for all the, except for the shares, but basically we have dollar amounts for all the items on the income statement. And when you make pro forma statements, generally what you do is, at least initially when you make a pro forma model, is you assume that you measure most items as a percentage of sales. So what we're going to do is basically for virtually all the items here on the income statement, we're going to measure everything, all the expenses, cost of goods sold, and all these expenses, and all the subtotals, such as gross profit. We're going to measure those as a percentage of sales. And once we've got those percentages are going to be used for projecting all these numbers out. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and move all these columns to the right. So I'm going to start with, just so you see, all I'm doing is I'm starting with the October 27th, 2019, that part of the column, that it's cell B11, and I have highlighted all the way through down to B31, which is the last number. That's the diluted shares. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to shift those cells to the right. I'm going to shift those cells to the right, okay, and put a column. I put a column between the titles and the monetary amounts. Okay, and what I'm going to label, I'm going to go ahead and label this column percentage, and this column is going to be very important, and is very important in making pro forma financial statements, because, as I just said, initially when you make a set of pro forma financial statements, every number, or at least a lot of them, are measured as a percentage of the sales. Okay, so I've got what I'm going to have here is I'm going to put the percentage, every number for the year 2019, every one of these monetary numbers here, including expenses, subtotals, everything except earnings per share. That wouldn't make sense. Everything in the income statement itself, I'm going to measure as a percentage of sales. Okay, and that's why I moved all the cells to the right. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start with measuring sales itself as a percentage of sales. Otherwise, sales as a percentage of itself. Okay, so here's the formula. So I'm going to go equals, and I'm going to just point to sales, which is 14 billion. I'm going to divide by sales itself, which is 14 billion also. So you should get 1. And of course, and we'll format these things as we go down, but as you should know, I'm sure you do, that of course 1 is equal to 100%. Okay, so obviously sales is 100% of itself. But of course that number is not very interesting. What is interesting is the percentage of sales that all the other numbers constitute, such as cost of goods sold, gross profit, and all the expenses. R&D, research and development, might be interesting for a company like this, because this company is the type of company that cannot survive without research and development. Okay, so we've got this formula here. We've got C12 divided by C12. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take all these numbers here, going down all the way to the bottom of the income statement, and take them as a percentage of this $14.6 billion sales number. So what I'm going to do, as you could have guessed, is I'm going to put dollar signs in front of the C and a dollar sign in front of the 12 to freeze that number right there. Okay, and so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just copy that number, and of course there's going to be some meaningless numbers here, but I'm just going to go down to net income here. Okay, and what this is going to give me is this gives me the percentage by which the percentage of sales which each one of these numbers represents. So cost of goods sold was 56% of sales. The gross profit was 44% of sales. That makes sense. I'm just going to go down here and clean up a little bit. This is a title, so you don't have to worry about that one. Research and development is 14% of sales. That would be a nice number to compare with other companies. And also maybe that 14%, if you take 14%, if you take that number and think that, you may want to ask yourself, how many sales is that research and development producing? So that number might be good, I'm not sure. So there's your marketing and selling expenses were 4%. So apparently this company is more interested in research and art development than it is marketing its product. You've got G&A expenses. They've lowered a lot of their G&A by going over to China, by the way, and along with a lot of other things. And then you've got those are your total operating expenses were 21% of sales. Their income from operations is 23%, and then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We are going to keep, I'm going to go ahead and for now, I'm going to keep all the earnings per share numbers in there right there. Okay, so that is your income statement, the way it's initially going to be set up. Now let's go ahead, just to move ahead here, and set up the balance sheet too. I'm not going to set up a statement of cash flows. Usually you actually make your own, but we're going to do it in a shorthand version this time. Let's go ahead and set up the balance sheet just to get that over with. And then I'm going to give you two very important rules for how you continue in the next video, which is completing the financial statement. Okay, so there's your income statement. You have, we're going to project out for 5 years. We'll start it in a few minutes, a couple minutes. And what I've done is I've taken this percentage column is incredibly important, and it represents the portion of sales for each of these line items. So 56% of the cost of goods sold, were 56% of sales. Your gross profit was 44% of sales. Research and development, 14%, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's interesting to see that your net income was 19% of sales, which really isn't too bad. This company may actually produce some cash flows. We'll get back to that. Well, anyway, let's get to our balance sheet. So this is the bottom of the income statement. Right now, let's put in the words balance sheet. Okay? And what we're going to do now is, and this is the best way to do it, is we're going to take all of the headers that we had all the years and the percentage, all the headers that we had for the income statement, and let's copy those down to the balance sheet, because this is going to be a fairly long worksheet, and it's nice to have those to refer to when you're scrolling down. Okay, so our balance sheet will have the same headers as our income statement. Okay, and like we did for the income statement, we're going to have a percentage column. And just like on the income statement, all of the items on the balance sheet will be as a percentage of sales. And I'll talk about those. Let's get the mechanics over with, but I'll probably talk about those in the next video as I go through a little bit. I'm just cleaning up here a little bit here. Okay, and okay, so our balance sheet is going to be obviously for the same date. We've got our percentages, and we're going to project the balance sheet out 5 years. But we're just going to we're just in the setup mode in this video. We're not in the, let's finish the entire balance sheet and financial statements. That's going to be the next video. Okay, so obviously what we're going to do in the balance sheet is we're going to copy over both all the accounts, the titles, line items in the balance sheet, and we're going to also copy over the numerical amounts. Okay, so we're in the pro forma valuation worksheet here. So all you've got to do is come over here to the consolidated balance sheets worksheet over here. And here we've got all our balance sheet items here. And since we've already got the date in the pro forma sheet, we don't have to copy that over. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy over every single, for October 27, 2019, I'm going to copy every single title and all of the numerical amounts, the monetary amounts in the balance sheet, starting with cash and going all the way down to total liabilities and shareholders' equity. So we're going to do this again. Start with current assets and go all the way down to total liabilities and shareholders' equity. And all I'm going to do is just a simple cut and paste, no linkage here. There's the cut and then the paste. We can put the paste, let's try this. We'll put the paste right there. Okay, now be careful here. One thing you want to be careful of is that when we did that, your numerical amounts are in the percentage column. Okay, so obviously we want to move those numerical amounts over to the October 27th, 2019 column. So let's just go ahead and cut those and paste those and just move them over there. Okay, so now we've got our base year for the balance sheet put in here. That base year is the same as for the income statement, obviously, basically 2019. And eventually what we're going to do is we're going to project all these amounts out to 2024, 5 years from now. Okay, now, just like in the income statement, where all of the items were measured as a percentage of sales, we're going to do this, the exact same thing in the balance sheet. We're going to measure all the items, including all the current assets, everything on here, as a percentage of sales. Now, in the next video, you'll find out that it's more valid to do that, more valid to do this measurement for some items than others, okay? Now, to do that, to just bring the percentages down, all you've got to do is take any one of these percentages that we calculated for the income statement where you had the dollar signs in front of the C and the 12. All you've got to do is take any one of those, and I'm sure you probably know this because you may know more Excel than I do, and copy that down to the balance sheet. So let's start with cash. So cash was 21% of sales, and that's, if you look at the formula, cash is C36. It's going all the way back up to C12. So you're taking C36 divided by C12, and that's giving you the cash was 21% of sales. Now that kind of makes sense because your level of cash should be somewhat related to your level of sales. But we'll get back to these relationships, which I'm going to talk about more about those in the next video. Okay, so all you've got to do then is take that 21%, because it's already, the sales cell has already been frozen, and we're just going to move it all the way down. I'm going to move it all the way down to everything. Now, obviously, some of those, most are valid, some are not valid in terms of theory, but that's the way most of these relationships are going to be used to project out. Everything is going to be based, everything, I can't emphasize enough, everything is as a percentage of sales. Okay, so far, here's what you should have. You should have your assumptions, your super growth rate, and your constant growth rate. And then you should have your income statement with all the titles here. Okay. And then you've got your net sales here, starting, and of course, all your income statement items. And every one of these should be measured as a percentage of sales. Okay, and then we don't do it for the earnings per share because that's fairly meaningless. And we come down here to the balance sheet, and just like we did in the income statement, all these numbers are measured as a percentage of sales. Okay, so for each of these statements, you have your titles, percentage, and the amount for your base year. Okay, now we're almost finished here because this is just a setup video. I'm not going to finish all the financial statements. That's going to be in the next video. And the last video, we finished the valuation. The last video or two, we finished the valuation. But this is just a setup video. But the things you set up here and the way you set up the formulas, especially the next ones, are going to be very important. Okay, so now, sales basically is the fundamental benchmark number. If your sales don't grow, your company's not going to grow. Okay, so that's why we're taking everything as a percentage of sales. So, and that's why in class I've been emphasizing how companies can use their different segments to grow. Which segment is going to grow their sales most? That's the basis for any company. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to work with a couple of formulas here, and these are very important. Okay, we're assuming that for the next 5 years, all of this is your super growth period. So all these right here, these 5 years, 2020, 21, 22, 23, 24, this is your 5-year super growth period. So in a sense, I could put the super growth phase, I could write a title over here and put super growth, but I don't want to put too many titles there. Okay, but we're going to assume that starting in 2019, when we had $14.6 billion in sales, that those sales are going to grow at 7% over the next 5 years. And I'm sure this would be an easy formula for anybody. Let's go ahead and do it though. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit the equal sign, and then we're going to go to the left and say, and take our 2019 sales of 14.6 billion, and we're going to multiply that times, open parentheses, 1 plus our super growth rate, which is in cell B3, close parentheses, and, close parentheses, and that will give us projected sales of 15.6 billion for 2020. Okay, and that's a pretty easy formula. You're just taking the previous year and multiplying it times 1 plus the 7% growth rate, or 1 plus B3 basically. Okay, since we're going to copy this out and we want to freeze that 7% where the cursor is now, we're going to go ahead and we're going to put dollar signs in front of both the B and the 3. Okay, so now we've frozen in the 7% and we can copy the number out starting with 2020, and we can copy out all the way to 2024. Okay, so let's take a look at these numbers. So we're projecting that if we had $14.6 billion of sales in a recent year, that by 2024, assuming a 7% growth rate, we're going to have about 20.5 billion in sales, which is not bad. This is not a super duper duper growth company, but it's not bad. Okay, now the next two lines are going to be incredibly important for making pro forma financial statements. Not just because they're important from an accounting perspective, because they're important from the perspective of building pro forma financial statements. So these are going to be two very important rules when we're making pro forma financial statements. The first rule is really a formula, and I'm just going to call this, I'll call this the base formula. We'll call it the base formula. And I call this the base formula because if you structure this formula right, you will be able to construct, in the next video, we're going to construct the financial statements just by copying this formula down to certain lines. You'll be able to fill in much of both the income statement and the balance sheet just by copying this formula down, just by copying some line which incorporates this formula. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at how we're going to do this. Okay, so we know that cost of products sold, cost of goods sold was 56% of sales in 2019. We're going to make the initial assumption in our model that the linear relationships hold, that for the next 5 years also that the cost of products sold are going to be also equal to 56% of sales. Okay, and this is just, we'll call it an initiating formula is what we're going to do. Okay, now the way we're going to do this is, this is an individual line item, but the way we're going to do this is we're going to take whatever number we have here, whatever number we're working with. In this case, we're going to take this. Actually, we're going to take the sales number, which in this case is D12. Take the sales number and multiply it by this percentage. And by doing that, we're keeping the assumption that most of the relationship between sales and many of the line items is linear. So in this year, we're going to assume, in this year and all future years until 2024, we're going to assume that the cost of goods sold is 56% of sales. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just take this, I'm going to open an equation, and I'll take the sales number, which is D12, and I'm going to multiply that times the percentage, which is in the percentage column, which is 56% in the percentage column. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to see my result there, which is 8,800 to 8,797, 8,800 more or less. And so this 8,800 more or less should be, and we'll check it again, should be 56% of my 2020 sales of 15630.56. Okay, now here is the important point, and I wish I knew more about making this flash, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put this in red. And the reason I'm putting the base formula in red is because the most important part of this for facilitating your construction of these pro forma financial statements is to put the dollar signs in the formula for this item in the right place. That's going to allow us to copy this number over all the way to the future years. And once we have that, to use this line or any other one which embeds the base formula, to just copy that to any other of the lines which use which we calculate as a percentage of sales. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. Here's the important part. When you build this formula, when you finalize this formula, make sure that you put a dollar sign in front of the 12 here, and that you put a dollar sign in front of the B here. Okay, and you'll get the same number, but by putting the dollar sign in front of the 12 and by putting a dollar sign in front of the B, okay, that's going to enable you to copy this formula both to the right, horizontally to the right, so you can copy and fill in the years here, project out the years, but as we go down, it's going to enable you, and we're not going to get this till the next video, it's going to enable you to copy any one of these lines which embeds the base formula down to a lot of the other lines, and it makes making pro forma financial statements very easy. Let's go ahead and copy this over. Okay, and we'll check it in a second. Okay, so those are the numbers that we get for our cost of products sold. Okay, and let's say that that's the first golden rule of making these, of setting up these pro forma financial statements, besides all the other things. But the two very important setup things are getting this formula right. You'll notice getting this formula right here, right. I'm emphasizing by putting the dollar sign in front of the 12, in front of the B there, whatever the cells are, so that you can copy out here, and so that each one of these numbers here will be equal to 56% of the sales for the respective year. So, and we'll check that in a second. That's the first golden rule. So I'm going to put here, that's rule 1. Use the base formula. So rule 1 is use the base formula. Use this base formula when you're making these financial statements. Use that formula right here, that base formula right there. So you can copy out and then later copy down. Okay, now we're almost finished here in this video. This is a setup video. Then in the next video, we're going to work it all the way down with our base formula. That's our first rule. Now here's the second rule, and if you don't follow the second rule, you're gonna get an incomplete for the course. I can guarantee it. And this time, unlike last time, I'm not kidding. This is very important. On any set of pro forma financial statements, subtotals should be calculated as subtotals. Here's what I mean by that is gross profit is a subtotal. We know from basic accounting that gross profit is a subtotal. It's net sales less cost of goods sold. Total operating expenses, that's a subtotal too. That's the sum of all your operating expenses. Income from operations, that's a subtotal too. That's your income. That's going to be your gross profit less your operating expenses. So you must, because you're an accountant especially, you must calculate all subtotals as subtotals. Don't just take the one formula we have here and copy it down, because you could do that, but you'll get results that are ultimately wrong. Okay, so all subtotals on pro forma statements must be subtotals. So let's go ahead and emphasize that gross profit is a subtotal just by underlining the cost of goods sold. Okay, so rule 2, I'm going to put here, rule 2 is I'm just going to put subtotals. And by that, I mean that all subtotals should be calculated as subtotals. There's absolutely no excuse for not doing that. I've had people that just take the whole formula, this entire calculation, and just copy it all the way down, and they get everything wrong. Okay, and you will get everything wrong if you do that. So all subtotals must be calculated as the correct accounting subtotals. That's rule 2 in setting this thing up. Okay, so we all know that gross profit is sales less cost of goods sold. Okay, so let's just do this. We're going to calculate this as a subtotal. So your net sales minus for 2020, your cost of goods sold of 8,800 more or less gives you a gross profit of 6,833. Okay, but keep in mind that this is a subtotal and it was calculated as a subtotal. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and copy the gross profits over here, and you'll notice that they're all calculated as D12 minus D13. Once again, all subtotals, whether they're differences or where they're sums, are calculated as subtotals. That's just basic accounting. If all you do is take one number and calculate everything, the entire thing, as a percentage of sales using these numbers here, including the subtotals, you'll get bad results. Your pro formas will be totally invalid. So that's where I'm finishing on this video. And in the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to start with this worksheet right here, and I'm going to go ahead and finish the financial statements. Okay, but here is what you should have so far. You should have, after this video, first of all, obviously you should have your basic valuation over here, which is what we did in the first video. And we got a value of $176 per share, more or less. And then we started our pro forma valuation with the same assumptions. We have an income statement. Both the income statement and the balance sheet have a percentage column, which is a percentage of sales. This is your base year. 2019 is your base year. And then your 5 super growth years are 2020 through 2024. Okay? And the only thing we've done is set this up. We haven't finished these, but we've started the process, in a sense, by, first of all, computing our sales using the 7% growth rate. So just to review this, each sales number here is the previous sales number, the previous year's sales number, growing by 7%. Okay? And then this is the important part. Each cost of goods sold line for each year is 56% of that year's sales. So this 8,800 is 56% of the 2020 sales of 15,630. The 2021 cost of goods sold are 56% of the 2021 net sales of 16,724. Okay? And I got it, and I can't emphasize this enough, by using, I guess call it using the base formula. But that's just taking the net sales times that 56%, but putting the dollar sign in front of that 12, in front of that B. That's going to allow me in the next video to take this line or any other line which is based on, which embodies that base formula, and just copy it down to any line which is based on a percentage of sales. Anyway, so here's what we should have. You should have your income statement. You should have the first 3 lines of the income statement. The cost of goods products sold is based on this base formula here. Your gross profit is a difference. That's your second golden rule too, is that, excuse me, don't do that, is that all subtotals are going to be should be calculated as subtotals according to good accounting. So, and according to, in order to make your statement even close to being valid, so our gross profit, the subtotals, all accountants know, is net sales minus cost of products sold. And then what we're going to do in the next video is using these 2 rules, the base formula rule and the subtotals rule. We're going to go ahead and finish in the next video both our income statement and our balance sheet. So I'm just giving you an idea of what you should have, and you should be able to just go backward and see what you have. Anyway, so Thank you very much once again, and good accounting. And everybody take care, because these are tough times. This is very unexpected, this whole thing. And of course, good bowling. Okay, I don't know if I'm going to be bowling for a while. Anyway, thank you very much. Bye.